Have you ever said to yourself, I just don't feel like my personal story is worthy of being told? Or my personal favorite, I don't see how my personal story relates anyway to my brand or my business. In today's video, I'm going over the 3 tips to help you improve your storytelling for sales. Hey, it's Tom Jacobs. Thank you so much for stopping by the channel today. If you're new here, this is all about presentation, performance, and more profits for your business. I publish every Tuesday and Friday, so make sure that you're hitting that little subscribe button right there so that you are notified every time new content is published. First of all, let's address the elephant in the room. Well, there is no elephant here. Let's talk about everyone's fear of telling their personal story and why a lot of people that I work with, some private clients that just don't feel like their story is worthy of being told, or like I said before, they just don't feel like their story has anything to do with their brand. Well, let me put that fear at ease, because in my experience, in today's environment, people do business with those that they know, like, and trust. And if you're doing business on the internet, you're doing webinars, it's even more important that you are sharing information about you so that your prospects get to know you, so that they get to trust you, and ultimately they will buy from you. Not only do your prospects need to know who you are, they need to understand why you do what you're doing so that they can get behind you. And while I get a lot of clients that tell me, I don't want to make it all about me, the presentation that I give to my clients or on stage or on the webinar, it just seems so self-reflecting, and I just don't want to do that. I want to make it about the client. And that's all fine and good. And at some point you do need to make it about the client. But at the same time, the client needs to know you so that they get to like you, they get to trust you, and they will do business with you. I put together these 3 tips to help you improve your storytelling for sales, ultimately so that you can connect with more people, with your prospects, grow your practice, and help a lot more people. I also have some resources I'd like to share with you, so just make sure you stick around for the entire video as I will reveal what those are and how to get them. So there I was, standing naked in front of 60 prospects. Well, not literally naked, but it certainly felt that way. You see, I was sent over to England to give a presentation towards 50 fitness entrepreneurs for a coaching program that I was a part of, and ultimately I was responsible for selling their coaching program to other fitness entrepreneurs. I was giving all this great content for 55 minutes of this in-person presentation, and at the end of the 55 minutes, nothing. Just blank looks from everybody. And when I asked them to make the purchase, nobody raised out their hand, nobody filled out the form, and certainly I felt completely defeated. I had missed one critical piece of the presentation. I didn't share who I was, the struggles that I had had with sales and growing my fitness business, and ultimately those prospects didn't know me. And when they didn't know me, they didn't like me necessarily, and they certainly didn't trust me enough to buy the program. I had another talk in 2 weeks, and this time I took those learnings from being naked in front of those 60 prospects and ultimately shared a lot about my struggles in business with the 10 participants that were in this workshop. And at the end of the workshop, when I gave my pitch on signing up for this coaching program, 10 out of 10 bought. And at the end of the day, I sold $28,000 worth of that program to the participants. A complete difference between sharing my personal stories and not sharing my personal stories. Stick around for the last tip, and I'm going to dissect what I just did there so that you can learn what tip number 3 is. Tip number 1. You want to find the story that has the most emotional impact to you. What does that mean, emotional impact? When you think back to that time, that story, that moment, does your heart start to beat a little bit faster? Does your palm start to sweat a little bit? Are you a little short on breath? That is your body telling you that there's an emotional connection with you in that story. And when you have that emotional connection, then you're going to be able to relate that more to your audience, and they're going to be connected with you. There was a study recently done at Princeton University, and it was where they hooked up the storyteller and the story receivers to functional MRI machines. And so they could check the brain waves in real time of both the storyteller as well as the receivers of the story. And what they found was, as the storyteller was telling the story, the brain was lighting up in the same place on both the teller and the receiver of the story. So there was this instant neural connection between the storyteller and the receiver of the story. And the more emotional of the story and the more emotional impact of that story, the more that the lights were going off in the brain. Fascinating study. Depending on my personal audience that I'm talking to, I have several different stories that I love to tell that have a really big emotional impact on me. The first was when I was 30 years old and was facing a diagnosis of high blood pressure, high cholesterol, and being 40 pounds overweight, and not knowing what to do with my health and fitness. And ultimately losing 40 pounds of fat and gaining 10 pounds of muscle in 12 weeks, which started my whole fitness journey and transition into the fitness industry. The other story that I like to tell is a more business related story, but it's about when I almost went broke in my business and I had to call my father for money. And at 40 years old, when you have to call a parent for money, that's a very humbling experience. And the third story that I personally like to tell, and as it relates to just setting goals and achieving things, especially when obstacles come in the way, is when I did a bodybuilding competition, and ultimately I failed at the first one, came back, and I won the second one. I have a quick question to ask you. Are you putting stories into your presentations, especially your sales presentations, whether that's one-on-one, on camera like a webinar, or live on stage? So just post down below. I'd love to hear what you have to say about actually putting the stories into your presentations. So tip number 2, create a relationship between your personal story and your brand. Now, on the surface, a lot of these stories don't always have a natural correlation with the business, but there is always a way to relate it back to your business. Some type of learning that you had during your time going through that struggle or going through that happy time, whatever the story happens to be. They don't always have to be a tragic story. It could be a very happy story as well. But you learn something from that story. And when you learn something, you can always relate it back to what you're trying to get your audience to learn as well. So there's always a way to relate that story back to your business at hand. When I talk about my bodybuilding fail, I can definitely use that for business. I can use it for fitness talks. I can use it for motivational talks as well. And in fact, I do have that as part of my keynote address that I usually give. But on the surface, a lot of people might be saying, well, how does bodybuilding really relate to business? And how does it relate to motivation? We can see the fitness relationship, but business? Well, actually, it relates very well because it's all about setting a goal and having obstacles come in its way and overcoming those obstacles to ultimately win. That is the learning that I like to give to people as I'm telling that story. And I'm always able to relate it back to the business. Think about your stories and how you can relate them back to your business through what you learned during that time. I want you to be able to put together your story so it reads like a Hollywood blockbuster movie. I put together a little storybook that I'd love for you to have. The link is down in the description. So just click on that link and download that PDF and then just go through step by step. I also have a bonus training video that will come along with that workbook where I work with a client in rearranging her story so it has the most emotional impact for her audience. So make sure you click on that link down below and get that storybook and go through that full training. Tip number 3, one of my favorites, it's called Start with a Bang. And that's what I did when I was telling that story about doing the presentation where nobody bought. The first sentence that I gave you was, I was standing naked in front of 60 prospects. Well, that's starting the story off with a bang. That's to get immediate attention from your audience. You want to say something rather shocking so that they put down their cell phones, they pay attention to you, so they stop talking to their neighbors, and actually listen to what you have to say. And that's the whole point of having this impact sentence. And that's what I call it, is an impact sentence. It's the very first sentence. It's where the crisis happened or where you had the biggest learning. That's where you want to start. And then you can back up to what led up to the story and then ultimately what you learned. And of course, if you get that storybook down below, it's going to take you through that whole process so you can learn how to exactly do that. The other story that I like to tell about being overweight and ultimately losing the weight and getting fit, I always start that story off with, at 30 years old, I was staring down the barrel of a gun. And that usually gets people's attention straight away. You can start this bang off with a question like, have you ever had a goal that's been ripped out of your hands, thrown on the ground, and stomped into a million pieces? That's a pretty provocative question. So you can always start it with a question, or you can start it with a statement like, at 30 years old, I was staring down the barrel of a gun. And when you start with a bang, you're going to have that audience's attention for the entire length of your presentation. And then at the end, when you give the pitch, they're going to sign up. Well, I hope this video was super helpful for you in terms of helping you with your presentation, which is the storytelling piece, and ultimately with your performance, and then on to get you some more profits in your business. If you like this video, just give it a thumbs up, make some comments down below. And if you haven't done so already, just go ahead and hit that subscribe button. That way you get notified every time new content is posted. I've also put up a couple other videos for you, so we'll put those right here and here so that you can get some more learning from the channel. And until next time, you have a great day.